Good morning. This is Diane Welch and Caroline Hightower at the Hampton B. Allen Library. And we have our guest with us today, John Marek, who is our Economic Development Director. Not only that, but John is the author of 5 books, and he's written numerous articles and just a very busy fella. And we are so appreciative of him taking time out of that schedule today to talk with us. And we're going to introduce John now. And John, if you will, we'll talk about some of your books and how you got into writing to begin with. We have one of your books here, Ben and the Art of the Lawnmower Maintenance. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Diane and Caroline. Thank you all for inviting me to come today. I'm really excited to be, well, not at the Hampton B. Allen Library, although it's right down the street from my office. I'm here in my little box on Zoom. But yeah, I've been writing for a long time. When I was a kid in elementary school, every year we used to do this essay thing where you'd write an essay and it would get sent away, and the school would pick the best essay from the school, and it would go to a regional level, and then would go into, and when I was in, I think it was 3rd or 4th grade, one of the essays I wrote made it up all the way up to like the regional level where it got smashed by somebody who could actually write. But that kind of encouraged me a little bit. So I've been writing since I was a little kid. Then when I wrote a little bit in college, I thought actually there was a point when I was in college when I thought, hey, maybe I'd like to give this writing thing, professionally a try. And then some other things happened and we didn't really do that. And then when I was in the late 90s, early 2000s, I traveled a lot. I was working for a consulting firm, and I was flying all over the country. I was spending a lot of time in airports and hotel rooms. And this was before the internet was what it is today, where you couldn't just, you didn't have access to every single movie ever made at the click of a mouse. You spent a lot of time, sitting around. And so I started writing in the airport. I would see a person sitting across there, and I'd make up a little story about that person, and I'd write it down. And a lot of those stories actually turned into some of the short stories that were in my first short story collection called The Bug Jar. And I just kind of went from there and expanded my writing a little bit. For the most part, I consider myself to be an essayist and a storyteller. I do write a lot of creative nonfiction, although I do write some fiction, and I'm currently working on a novel. So someday, very, very soon, hopefully, I'll have a real piece of fiction out there on the market. But those 5 books that you talked about, 2 of them are short story collections. As I said, one of them, most of the stories were written in airports and hotel rooms back in the early 2000s. And then the second one was an anthology of stories based around an alternate universe in which the Russians beat the Americans to the moon. And if that sounds like an Apple television series, it is. But my book predates the Apple television series, and we came to some different conclusions about how things worked out too, by the way. But I wrote that, and that one, I published that kind of at the same time, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing in July of 2019. That book came out. So, and then my other 3 books are essay collections, and they're a little bit more business oriented. The first book's Secrets of Successful Neighborhood Marketing, and it is truly just a business how-to book. The second 2, the one that you held up, is called Ben and the Art of Lawnmower Maintenance. And it's a series of essays largely about, well, lawnmower maintenance, but also my father, who was very much into lawnmowers and small engine repair. So it's a little bit of a memoir and a little bit of a practical book on lawnmowers. And then my latest book, which was actually a reprint of a book that I published back in 2007 or 2008, called Breakfast at Midway, was it was originally a book that was about my experiences as a consultant flying all over the country. And it still is that, but a lot of that book was really dated because, as I mentioned, there was no social media back then, and there was none of the things that we have now. And so about half of the content of that book really felt dated. And so I went back and I edited it, and I added some more recent articles, actually a couple from my time here in Wadesboro, as well as some from my time in Statesville. Republished it just a few months ago. And actually the response to that's been pretty good. I've gotten some really nice comments from folks who read it. And we do sell that book, by the way, in Wadesboro down at Speckled Paw Coffee. You can get it for $5 with any coffee purchase. So there's my shameless plug for the morning.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, so that's kind of the story of how I got to be a writer and how I got to be where I am. So
Right.
Do you write every day, John?
pretty much. I mentioned Speckled Paw Coffee. They have a newsletter, and Speckled Paw is a coffee chain. They have 3 locations. They're working on a 4th right now. And I have a weekly article that runs in their newsletter for all the locations. Actually, the distribution for all 3 locations is approaching 4,000. So it's a pretty significant mailing list of people who are getting that. So I write an article for them, and that usually takes 2 days to put that together. And then, as I mentioned, I'm working on a novel that I hope to come out in the fall. We'll see about that. And so, I do write pretty much every day. Every once in a while, I'll skip a day. I didn't write yesterday. I was up hiking in the mountains, gaining experience for my writing. That's the way I like to look at it. It's kind of research.
Yes, that's very important too. Well, I was looking that Secrets of Neighborhood Marketing, Building Your Business One Neighbor at a Time, that Kindle edition, that sounded like something that is really good. You reach it where people can get ideas and business technique, different things like that. That sounds like a wonderful thing. Did you get a lot of response to that, John?
Well, let me tell you how that book came about. I mentioned I was a consultant, used to fly all over the country back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And one of the things I did as a consultant is I would do these day-long marketing presentations. And if you ever stood up by yourself in front of an audience for an entire day, you will realize how difficult that is. But I used to do that. I would go and I would do presentations for chambers of commerce and economic development organizations. And I would always hand out a workbook. And the way that workbook came about is it had a bunch of exercises and a bunch of information in it that was kind of a leave behind that the folks worked through and then could take home. And we printed it up, and we'd go down to the quick print place, and we'd print up a bunch of copies of it, and we put it in this spiral binder. Well, the person who was working as my executive assistant at the time said, there's this company, and they print books, and we could have these things printed, and it would probably be cheaper than what we're doing now. And so I looked into it, and it was a company called Lulu Press up in Raleigh. And indeed, when I looked into it, I could have this workbook made into a paperback book, which would cost me $4 or $5 as opposed to the 10 or 12 I was spending to have these things made up. So we started doing that. And then when the seminar series I did was called Secrets of Neighborhood Marketing. And when that came to an end, I said, well, I could just kind of like write what I used to say in this seminar and make it into a book. And so that's what I did. I fleshed out the exercises with what I used to say in the seminar. So what you really have there is a seminar, is basically the transcript of a seminar in a book. And I will say it is interesting. It does not make the most compelling reading. So it is a little dry, unfortunately. There's some good jokes in it, but for the most part, it's kind of like for the hardcore person who's interested in learning about this technique for marketing. And that's another thing about that book. I mentioned that when I was doing these seminars, there was very little in the way of social media. I think LinkedIn existed, but there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was none of this stuff.
Right.
And so what neighborhood marketing was, the concept was, is it was basically social media, analog social media. It was a way of getting your message out there through things like newsletters and coupons and a variety of things that now is basically what we do on Twitter and Facebook and all the other things. So the truth of the matter is it's a little bit dated, but the principles and concepts of it are still very valid. It's just some of the terminology and technology is a little dated.
Right. Well, I thought that sounded great, and it was in a Kindle edition and helpful for people who are starting small businesses or whatever. And hey, you're just a man with a plan before it's time. So
Yeah, well,
that's pretty wonderful, John. Well, I know with your doing the articles and different things for in your job, in your line of work, publishing probably was not something hard for you to get done, right? Who did your?
it was and it wasn't. You know,
Okay.
I had back in the mid 2000s, I had an article that ran once a month in our weekly local paper here in Huntersville. And I owed him 500 words every month. And it was very difficult for me to write that. It truly was. Now I put out 500 words a week for the Speckled Paw with no trouble at all. So something happened in there, and I think that what it is writing kind of begets writing. When you don't write much, you want every word to be exactly right, and you spend a lot of time parsing words and doing that. When you owe somebody 500 words a week, you don't do that so much. And the other thing is, I'm a tremendous editor. I go back and I want to edit my work. I will write something and I will go back and I'll read it and I'll change it and I'll go back and I'll read it and I'll change it. And the nice thing about having 500 words due every week is you give it to them, they publish it, it doesn't change. And for better or for worse, it doesn't change. And that's been really, really helpful for me. As far as getting things published, I've self-published all 5 of my books. I will say that this novel that I'm working on right now, and we'll talk a little bit about that because it's something I've been working on for several years. I am actually going out and soliciting some traditional publishers on that. I think there is a market for it. It's a small market. It's not something, I'm not going to be J.D. Robb or Stephen King or anyone like that. But I think it is something that is commercially viable. It's in a genre called that I've kind of called outdoor adventure thriller. These are books by people like Paul Dwarin and a couple of others. And essentially they have some sort of a law enforcement officer whose job involves working in the outdoors and solves mysteries. So in the case of Paul Dwarin, which incidentally is an author that the first book of his I ever read, I borrowed from your library. And then that got me started. I think you had 2 books there, and then you brought in a third one for me from one of the other Sandhills, and then all the rest I bought. So thank you for that. But his primary character is a character named Mike Bowditch, and Mike Bowditch is a game warden in Maine who deals with a variety of different types of issues and mysteries there in the state of Maine. I have another author named Keith McCafferty, and he's written a series of books that take place out in Montana, and his character is not really a law enforcement officer, although he occasionally is hired by the local sheriff, who is part of the books, to do some work for him. But he is a very interesting character. I love the character. He is a fly fishing guide, watercolor artist, part-time crime solver. And my character actually is my character is named Owen Sinclair, and he's actually a park ranger here in North Carolina at a fictitious park called Craven Fork, which is very, very similar to South Mountains. It's kind of a conglomeration of South Mountains and Stone Mountain State Park here in the state. And I have right now 4 of these books in my head. The first one is called Craven Fork, and it involves a lost teenage hiker that turns out to be much more complicated than just somebody getting lost in the woods. So I think that, like I said, this isn't a huge genre, but it is a genre you can go to, the library, you can go to Barnes and Noble, and you can find these authors there. So obviously somebody's reading these books, and I'd kind of like to join that fraternity if I can. So.
Right. And so when is there a near date for the completion of this? And you said you have 4 in your head that you're working
I
on
have
right
4 in
now?
my head. Now I can tell you the titles. The
Wonderful.
first one's Craven Fork, the second one's Hellbender, the third one's Dark and Deep, and the fourth one is Bite of Souls. And I have a general plot for each of them. The only one that I've really fleshed out in terms of writing is the first one, Craven Fork, and it is about 3/4 done. I have enough of it done that I can send solicitation letters to publishers. So that's kind of where we are right now with it. And it's funny because I was having a real problem coming up with, and if you've done any fiction writing, you know that the issue is you get to the end and you want to end it in an exciting and satisfying way. And that is the very hardest thing to do. Ask Stephen King. That's always been the criticism of his work, is sometimes he has trouble sticking the landing. And it was the same thing for me. I played with about 5 or 6 different endings for this book. And then one day I was just sitting there and it came to me. It's like, oh, that's how this book needs to end. And once I did that, everything kind of fell into place. So I'm hoping that somebody will pick it up. If no one does, I will self-publish it. But I would love to get the bigger distribution. Although I will say, and you mentioned a little bit about self-publishing. I for my first several books were published through Lulu Press, which, as I mentioned, is based in Raleigh. And we did okay with that. But I recently started publishing through Amazon. I'm republishing all my books through Amazon Kindle Direct. And the market there is just so much larger. I mean, you get, you have some opportunities to market your work. And there's this, there's a program called Kindle Select. And if you put your books into Kindle Select, they become free on for people who have the Kindle Unlimited program. So your books are free, but you share the pot of money that Amazon gets from all those subscribers. Now you share the pot of, it's doled out based on how many downloads of your book there is. But I mean, I get a check every month for more money from Amazon from that program than I ever got from, selling the books outright. Now I will say this, we're not talking about a large check. We're talking about, we're talking about a 2-figure check, but nonetheless, it's money coming in every month, and I'm not doing anything. And so, I feel like if I get a little bit more, a book that's a little bit more mainstream in terms of its audience, we could do okay. And that's kind of the thing. So I'm happy I went to Amazon. I know there's some people out there who are not thrilled with the Amazon model for publishing, but so far it's been pretty good for me.
Right. And that's encouraging whenever you know that people are reading what you're writing, so that's intended. And we will definitely look forward to hearing about this when you complete it, John. You let us know, okay? The first that comes out, and we'll talk about it again, okay? Caroline, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Well, it seems that you have a lot of interest in, you just talked about the book you're writing right now, and then also the lawnmower maintenance, the outdoors. And before we started the interview, you talked about going hiking.
Mhm.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, you've got some involvement with the community garden. Could you tell us
Sure.
about?
Oh, absolutely. One of my passion projects, and yeah, maybe I'm spread myself a little bit thin with the writing and the economic development and the garden, but I like to stay busy. So a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to change churches, and I started attending a church called New Beginnings Moravian. And when I began attending this church, I didn't know a little something that about the church, and that is they owned a 13-acre piece of property out in the country between Huntersville and Concord on Route 73. And it's property that is dedicated toward a future church, but that church is probably not going to be built for at least 10 years and perhaps longer. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of property out in the country. And I'd always had an interest in gardening. I had worked in my previous church's community garden. I actually did some gardening there in Wadesboro. I sold some stuff at the farmer's market. I had a little apartment down there in town, and the folks who ran the apartment let me plant some stuff in the backyard, and I sold some of that at the farmer's market. But so I've always had an interest in gardening. So I kind of talked to them, and they said, well, that's really funny because we have been trying to start a community garden out there for years and years and years and years, and we've never been successful. It's just never worked for us. And I said, well, let me give it a shot. So we came out the first year. We put in 8 square foot garden beds. We had a really, really nice harvest. We donated everything that we picked to our local food pantry soup kitchen called Angels and Sparrows. It wasn't a lot. It was, maybe 200 tomatoes and 100 zucchini and some stuff like that. But it was something.
Right.
So the next year, since it was successful the first year, the next year we added a little bit. And we were originally planning to double the size of the garden, but that was 2020. And the pandemic convinced us that maybe we shouldn't be quite so aggressive. We aren't going to be able to get volunteers out to work as much. So we only increased the size of it by about 30%. So we did that, and that was last season. That was the second season. And this year, we've doubled that size. So we're up to about 1,000 actual square feet of planting space. And we're going to be putting in some things this year that we've not done in the past. We played a little bit with corn last year. It came up, the deer ate it all, but this year we're going to be planting quite a bit of corn. We're going to be doing potatoes this year, tomatoes, zucchini. We're going to be doing pumpkins. So we have a really, really exciting thing that we're doing out there.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get the kids involved. We're trying to get the kids to understand where their food comes from and how valuable it is to have gardening. And I was really, really, really surprised by something. When we started the program, I went in, and every spring we give the kids some little peat pots and some zucchini seeds, and they start our zucchini for us. So they take it home, they start it, they bring it back, we plant it. That was a nice way to get them involved. So the first class I did is I brought in a zucchini, and I held it up, and I said, does anybody know where this comes from? And I thought for sure those kids were going to say the grocery store, but they didn't. They said it comes from a garden. And I'm like, I'm so pleased with y'all. And so we started doing that, but we're trying to create, in essence, another generation of gardeners while still doing good for the community. Angels and Sparrows Soup Kitchen feeds about 150 people daily. Really good, nutritious food, not prepackaged food. They do most of the cooking of the food there, which is why they love our fresh ingredients. And we're excited to partner with them and be part of that. So it's been a really, really good experience for me. I don't have an official title, but I'm kind of the garden leader, I guess. And we have a core group of about 5 or 6 volunteers who help me with the watering and the gardening and the weeding and all of that. And then we will have special days where we bring the families in. Like we have a plant out day where we put all of the seedlings in, and that'll be this year, that'll be April 30th. And so, the kids come out and they help us put the seedlings in. They take the little trowels and they love doing that, putting the seedlings in. And we'll have a couple of those kind of like whole family events where we get the kids involved. So yeah, it's been a really good experience. Maybe someday I'll write about it.
Hey, that's wonderful. It's benefiting in so many different ways as you've shared that, and thank you for sharing that, John. And since you're a man of so many different talents, and then we wanted to just discuss a little bit about economic development, and to thank you for a lot of hard work that's being fruitful. Progress that is being made. So if you want to share a few things about that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I've been in Wadesboro now, Anson County, for about 5.5 years. We had a lot of goals when we came. Some of them we've been able to achieve. Some of them we're a little bit behind on. But we've got a lot of exciting things going on right now. Even with the pandemic, we are as busy right now as we've ever been. We have a couple of things that we brought into town that are going to be opening very soon. There's going to be the T-Mobile, Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins ice cream store is going to be opening not this week, but next week. They're going to be doing a ribbon cutting, I believe, on the 16th at that store. We have the Dollar General there at the intersection of 52 North and 74. That's going to be opening probably by the end of the month. We just recently announced the Family Dollar that's opening up in Ansonville, and they've broken ground on that. We're looking at probably a May or June opening on that store. And we have some other things that we're working on right now. The Rev Uptown facility, which opened in 2019, has really changed that entire West Wade portion of town. We have 2 new clothing stores that are going to be opening there. We have a sports bar that's going to be opening. It's not on West Wade; it's on one street over. But it's all due to that. We have. I don't know if you've been down to the yarn store, what I call the fiber arts store, but she's doing a great job down there, and that's something that we identified very early on as something that we could use in Uptown Wadesboro. So that whole area down there that we're kind of calling the Arts District, because it's based around the theater and the gallery and some of the other shops down there, has really taken off, and that's been really exciting. That area, when I started here 5.5 years ago, most of the stores down there were closed. It was just a bunch of closed storefronts. And now, although there are still some storefronts available, a lot of stuff has businesses in it, and we couldn't be more excited about that. So yeah, things are going okay. We have the new business park, or it's actually logistics park, the Atlantic Gateway, which is out a little bit east of Lylesville. We're working right now to upgrade the sewer connection out there. PD Electric just opened their new facility out at that park, so we're excited about that. And then we are at the Wadesboro Industrial Park, which is just a couple of miles up Route 109, or Green Street as we know it in town. We're going to start construction on a speculative building in there probably within the next 4 or 5 months. So a lot of exciting things going on right now.
That sounds great. Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for being our guest today. Thank you for sharing with us. And we're all learning with these, something that you're accustomed to, the remote programs, the virtual things. But hey, isn't it wonderful that we've progressed to where we can do all this stuff?
It's funny, because the one thing that I have learned since I've been doing Zoom is that when you have to look at yourself speak, which you don't do when you're talking to a crowd, but in Zoom you do, you watch yourself speak, and you have a little bit more control over your I guess body language. I mean, I can raise my eyebrows, I can look very serious, I can look very happy. So you do have a little bit more control over your body language. So I guess that's a a positive thing. You have a better feel for what you're expressing to your audience, and that's great. But yeah, I'm a little tired of seeing people in little tiny boxes on my computer screen. I can't wait to get back to seeing people more in person. So,
Well, we're hoping for change for the future. We just have to see how everything goes. But again, thank you for sharing with us today, John. We appreciate it so much. And
oh,
we'll
thank you
look
all.
forward
Thank you
to
all for inviting me. Thank you.
we'll look forward to your new book coming out. And like I say, keep us posted on that, will you? And
Oh, I
also,
will. Yeah.
okay, and the exciting events that are happening with the progress in Anson County economically. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much.